The parable of the broken window was introduced by copyright Rick Bastiat in his 1850 essay qu'on, voit, qu'on, voit par to illustrate why destruction, and the money spent to recover from destruction, is not actually a net benefit to society. The parable, also known as the broken window fallacy or glazier's fallacy, seeks to show how opportunity costs, as well as the law of unintended consequences, affect economic activity in ways that are unseen or ignored. The parable, Bastiat's original parable of the broken window from qu'on, voit, qu'on, voit par. Have you ever witnessed the anger of the good shopkeeper, James Goodfellow, when his careless son has happened to break a pane of glass? If you have been present at such a scene, you will most assuredly bear witness to the fact that every one of the spectators, were there even 30 of them, by common consent apparently, offered the unfortunate owner this invariable consolation: it is an ill wind that blows nobody good. Everybody must live, and what would become of the glaziers if panes of glass were never broken? Now, this form of condolence contains an entire theory, which it will be well to show up in this simple case, seeing that it is precisely the same as that which, unhappily, regulates the greater part of our economical institutions. Suppose it costs 6 francs to repair the damage, and you say that the accident brings 6 francs to the glazier's trade, that it encourages that trade to the amount of 6 francs I grant it. I have not a word to say against it. You reason justly. The glazier comes, performs his task, receives his 6 francs, rubs his hands, and, in his heart, blesses the careless child. All this is that which is seen. But if, on the other hand, you come to the conclusion, as is too often the case, that it is a good thing to break windows, that it causes money to circulate, and that the encouragement of industry in general will be the result of it, you will oblige me to call out, stop there. Your theory is confined to that which is seen. It takes no account of that which is not seen. It is not seen that as our shopkeeper has spent 6 francs upon one thing, he cannot spend them upon another. It is not seen that if he had not had a window to replace, he would, perhaps, have replaced his old shoes, or added another book to his library. In short, he would have employed his 6 francs in some way, which this accident has prevented. Differing interpretations. Bastiat's argument Austrian school theorists, and Bastiat himself, apply the parable of the broken window in a different way. Suppose it was discovered that the little boy was actually hired by the glazier, and paid a franc for every window he broke. Suddenly the same act would be regarded as theft. The glazier was breaking windows in order to force people to hire his services. Yet the facts observed by the onlookers remain true: the glazier benefits from the business at the expense of the baker, the tailor, and so on. Bastiat argues that society endorses activities that are morally equivalent to the glazier hiring a boy to break windows for him. Whence we arrive at this unexpected conclusion: society loses the value of things which are uselessly destroyed. And we must assent to a maxim which will make the hair of protectionists stand on end: to break, to spoil, to waste, is not to encourage national labor. Or, more briefly, destruction is not profit. What will you say, monitor industrial? What will you say, disciples of good M.F. Commons, who has calculated with so much precision how much trade would gain by the burning of Paris, from the number of houses it would be necessary to rebuild? Bastiat is not addressing production he is addressing the stock of wealth. In other words, Bastiat does not merely look at the immediate but at the longer effects of breaking the window. Moreover, Bastiat does not only take into account the consequences of breaking the window for one group but for all groups, for society as a whole. Austrian theorists cite this fallacy, saying it is a common element of popular thinking. The 20th-century American economist Henry Hazlitt devoted a chapter to it in his book Economics in One Lesson. The opportunity cost of war equals. The argument can be made that war is a benefactor, since historically it often has focused the use of resources and triggered advances in technology and other areas while reducing unemployment. The increased production and employment associated with war often causes some people to claim that war is good for the economy. However, this belief is often given as an example of the broken window fallacy. The money spent on the war effort, for example, is money that cannot be spent on food, clothing, healthcare, or other industries. The stimulus felt in one sector of the economy comes at a direct euro, but hidden euro cost to other sectors. Bastiat himself argued against the claim that hiring men to be soldiers was inherently beneficial to the economy in the second chapter of That Which Is Seen, and That Which Is Not Seen, the disbanding of troops. According to Heislight, it is never an advantage to have only a euro unregistered trademark as plants destroyed by shells or bombs unless those plants have already become valueless or acquired a negative value by depreciation and obsolescence. Plants and equipment cannot be replaced by an individual unless he or it has acquired or can acquire the savings, the capital accumulation, to make the replacement. The war destroys accumulated capital. Complications should not divert us from recognizing the basic truth that the wanton destruction of anything of real value is always a net loss, a misfortune, or a disaster, and whatever the offsetting considerations in a particular instance, can never be, on net balance, a boon or a blessing. Criticisms: the interpretations assume that the window has positive value and that replacing it is not a good investment. In the broader scope, offsetting factors can reduce or even negate the cost of destruction. For example, new technologies developed during a war and forced modernization during post-war reconstruction can cause old technologies to become valueless. Also, if two shopkeepers keep their window beyond the point where it would maximize their profit, the shopkeeper whose window is broken is forced to make a good investment euro increasing his comparative profit, or rather, reducing his comparative loss. Regardless, while wanton destruction of real value may not be a net loss, it is of course still a misfortune, not a blessing. Others argue that the broken window may not result in reduction of spending by the victim, but rather, a reduction in excessive savings. The logic of limited resources only applies when the economy is using most of those limited resources. If there are slack resources, we need merely mobilize some of the slack resources. The reductio ad absurdum of breaking 100 windows, then, only applies once underutilized resources have been used, and the tailor is forced to divert resources from more productive means. It has been argued that the parable, while intuitive, may not correspond to actual evidence. For instance, some economists argue that natural disasters can often result in improved growth in both the short and long term. Defenses equals. Bastiat and Austrian theorists argue a subjective theory of value, which holds that the value of a product is determined by its consumer or owner. Therefore, if the window had a negative value, it is because the owner already wishes it broken. If the proverbial window were old, and the newer proverbial window had a greater value, then the net increase in value in the economy is the difference between the value of the old and new window. Bastiat and Austrian economists also believe that depreciation and other losses of the value of goods reduces the net value in the economy by the amount of the reduction in value of the goods. These theorists further argue that very concept of excess savings is meaningless without the presumption of an authority which can define the proper amount of savings. Money saved represents demand for money, which is a commodity like windows or suits. The result of spending saved money is to decrease the demand for money relative to suits or glass and therefore contributes to general price inflation. Such an authority would suggest that by controlling prices, that the economy could be bettered. This concept when enforced by governments is known as price controls and results in shortages when prices are artificially reduced below market value. A shortage of savings results in a reduction of capital investment as more resources are diverted from future needs to present needs. The shop owner was saving so that he could grow his business, but an outside authority has determined that his savings were excess and that by breaking his window the economy will be better off. Without free exchange there would be no prices, and without prices there can be no economic calculation, and without proper economic calculation there is no means to determine whether or not a particular action will be profitable. Therefore any authority that suggests that there might be an excess of savings presumes the ability to make economic calculations without prices established by free exchange. Ludwig von Mises argued that this was impossible. See also, Cobra effect, creative destruction, disaster capitalism, Jevons paradox, rent-seeking, spending multiplier, tax choice, uneconomic growth. References. Bibliography Bastiat, Fra copyright DAO copyright Rick. That which is seen, and that which is not seen, original French, c'est qu'on voit et c'est qu'on ne voit pas. Translated by Patrick James Sterling. Wikisource. Heislight, Henry. Economics in One Lesson. Harper and Brothers. LCCN 46005937. Further reading, Abrams, Burton A. Parsons, George R. Is Cars a Clunker? The Economist's Voice 6 doi, 10.2202/1553-3832.1638. McGee, Robert W. Financial Bailouts and the Philosophy of Fra copyright DAO copyright Rick Bastiat. All estimatio, 88 to Euro 97. SSRN 2435748. Stringham, Edward P. Snow, Nicholas. The Broken Trailer Fallacy, Seeing the Unseen Effects of Government Policies in Post-Katrina New Orleans. International Journal of Social Economics 35, 480 Euro 9 doi, 10.1108/030682908108868885. Karabny, Louis. Bastiat's The Broken Window: A Critique. Journal of Libertarian Studies 21, 151 Euro 5. Mian, Atif R. Sufi, Amir. The Effects of Fiscal Stimulus, Evidence from the 2009 Cash for Clunkers Program. SSRN Electronic Journal doi, 10.2139/SSRN 1670759. Kaplan, Brian. Stringham, Edward. Mrs. Bastiat, Public Opinion, and Public Choice. Review of Political Economy 17, 79 Euro 105 doi, 10.1080/09538250420003138225. Stanfield, James. The Broken University, What is Seen and What is Not Seen in the Higher Education Sector. Economic Affairs 30, 53 Euro 8 doi, 10.1111 per Joule 1468-0270.20 10.020222x. External links, c'est qu'on voit et c'est qu'on ne voit pas, that which is seen and that which is not seen.